Hi, I'm Carmen.
And I'm Stephen, and this is Vienna Past and Present,
where we walk through the gilded and sometimes not so gilded halls of Vienna's history. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about something that we both recently watched on Netflix, and that is the docuseries Arnold, which is about Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so we kind of thought, since he's Austria's biggest export in the past 50 years, we would talk a little bit about the series today and then also about Arnold himself. Admittedly, there's not really a Vienna connection because he's not from the city, so we're playing a little fast and loose with our concept today, but we kind of thought,
that's
close
okay.
enough. I mean,
right?
Who even knows the difference?
Yeah. I'm sure he's been to Vienna. We're not going to do a detailed recap of the series, but we thought we'd add the Austrian perspective and some details that weren't covered at all or weren't fully explained in the documentary. I guess they're mostly little scandals, but this isn't us trying to tear him down either, right, Carmen? Like, I left the doc liking him more, honestly.
Yeah, I have to say me too. I kind of came out of it with more respect for him than I had going in.
Okay, so first part of additional color, the Austrian perspective. Let's start with the basics here. His accented English is one of his signatures at this point, I would say, at least here stateside. So how is his German? He came straight from the countryside. He hasn't lived in Austria for decades now. This one was a question mark for me. Curious what you think.
Yeah, it is an interesting point. I mean, right, the way that he speaks English, I mean, everybody has an imitation of him, right?
Right,
like, I think every comedian does an Arnold in English.
Mm-hmm.
In German, it's actually also kind of interesting at this point. So yeah, he kind of came from the countryside. Well, he definitely comes from the countryside. And he has this I looked at a couple of interviews from sort of like the 1980s. Even at that time, he definitely sounds very Austrian, but it's kind of cute. He has this like Styrian countryside dialect. And he's not really trying to hide it, which I think actually comes across as very authentic and cute, but it's not super extreme either.
Okay.
You know, it's not such a strong dialect that you wouldn't understand what he's saying.
Okay.
So, yeah, and he said in this interview, which I also liked, I mean, it has not much to do with his accent, but he says he's a European at heart, but an American citizen. So, you know, he's kind of between the two things.
Okay. Okay, very diplomatic. All right, but that's cool. And somehow that sort of fits him. It's like it would still be understandable, still be, commercial and like likable to all, but still his signature. Okay, that almost like it feels like a mirror a little bit, to like his accented English or something. It's like, yeah, you can totally understand him, but it's not like unmistakable and it feels authentic.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's true even in German, right? And you do notice, because I looked at some more recent interviews as well of him, well, not super recent, but like, 2000s of him speaking German. And there you can tell that there's already more kind of Americanisms, or like some of the pronunciation is sounding a little bit more American. So you can kind of tell that he's been speaking a lot of English. And yeah, in the end, he kind of ends up speaking German very similar to the way that he speaks English, which is like a very, it's very unique. I think also in German, if you heard just a clip, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's Arnold.
Okay, wow. All right. Like, honestly, that helps him, I would think, with probably a lot of people.
It's distinct. You got to give him that.
Okay. Gosh, like I keep liking him a little bit more and more, and I don't know. We've done enough episodes now. I'm not just loving every single person we're covering. Okay, yeah, I'm charmed.
I know. Are we becoming total Arnold stans? I mean, I wasn't, but I am charmed.
I wasn't. I was just neutral or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so more broadly, how is he perceived there in Austria? Like, I think it can kind of go either way when locals become these huge international celebrities, and like a country might feel represented by them or something like that. So yeah, how is he perceived there?
So I would say on the whole, generally positive. I mean, he's definitely our most successful, export, with quotes, in modern times. I mean, he's by far the most well-known Austrian. And I think most people even know that he's Austrian, which...
Yeah, actually.
A lot of people confuse other people for Germans, but he's pretty distinctly Austrian, I'd say. Of course, there have been some ups and downs, and we're going to talk a little bit later about probably his lowest point in the court of Austrian public opinion. Mm-hmm. There's been a couple of rough patches, but on the whole, I would say that people either have probably a neutral or a more positive view of him. And it's a point of pride, right? People know him. He made it big in the US. he was a movie star, he became a governor, he married a Kennedy, all of that.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous story, actually. Like, how was this not a documentary earlier? But yeah.
Right? I mean, it's pretty wild, actually, what all he achieved. Yeah. And he really did and does come from this very small town in the south of Austria. It's very near where my family is from, so I know the area very well.
Oh,
and I mean, it's countryside.
You're like a 12th cousin, is what you're implying. Okay.
We probably, look, everything's a little related down there, so yeah.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people don't really want to admit it, but I'd say people are proud on the whole, and especially that he comes from this small town and really, achieved really big things.
Okay, so this leads, I think, nicely into these little tidbits that aren't in the documentary. I think they add interesting color to the story. Honestly, they are kind of like mild little and or large like scandals. I don't fault the documentary makers for keeping these out even. I'm curious what you think about that, Carmen, but like, yeah, these are just little bits that I found myself asking. So we dug a bit deeper here.
Yeah, I have to say I'm not surprised that these things were left out. I mean, we have to also say, Arnold was involved in the making of the documentary.
Exactly.
I mean, he gets interviewed and he's a big part of it. So, I mean, I didn't check the credits, but he's probably some kind of producer.
I would just assume.
Or executive producer or whatever. So, like, yeah, I'm not surprised that maybe some of these background things are not included. Although I will say that quite a lot of things are included.
More than I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially the stuff that is very public knowledge, like with his affair and his, kind of, child that came of that affair. I mean, he talks about that and he's pretty introspective about it.
Right.
But I think some of the stuff we're going to talk about now is maybe not that well known or just not really known in the public domain that well at all. So I'm not surprised they left it out.
So, okay, the first one, I mean, the elephant in like so many of the rooms here in some of these episodes, especially about more modern history.
In the room of every Austrian from like the mid-1900s. I mean, yeah.
So his dad was a member of a certain Adolf's political party. We can't say that name, because of the various apps that we're trying to be on, and we don't want to be flagged or censored or something. Wikipedia has more about this. In the documentary, Arnold says his dad was in the army, they had just lost the war, something to that extent, right? Which I think is a little bit more of a full-on, facing of the topic than, some other people from this era, it seems like, at least in the public eye, because there's no mistaking what that means.
He does at least address it. And he does, I think, go a little bit into, what it meant to have lost the war for all these people and kind of having been duped in a way and or being on the wrong side of history and like what that does to a population, which, I mean, yeah.
I don't hear that a lot, in American, media, like that kind of a story, even like that sentence, right?
Yeah, I found it I mean, he doesn't go into it in great detail, but I do feel like he was fairly open about it, especially also like the consequences of that sort of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wikipedia had more about what his dad did during the war. It said he was a policeman, he joined, the party after the Anschluss, and he was later present in Poland, France, the siege of Leningrad, like surprisingly diverse theaters. I was kind of surprised like he would be at both fronts. It just sounds like a lot, and hard for him and hard for everybody, obviously. Like
from France to Leningrad is covering a lot of ground.
Yeah. There's a scholar mentioned in this Wikipedia article. His name was Michael Berenbaum. He looked into Gustav Schwarzenegger, Arnold's dad, his past. He said that there isn't a record of what he did specifically in any of these theaters that he could find. And it kind of sounds like that's where historians have left this. So, yeah, I don't know. You just have to kind of assume in that many places, like, terrible things happened, right? And he was probably a part of those things. But again, somehow this feels like more of a head-on kind of facing and admission of these things than maybe I thought for some reason. So I guess I leave this even thinking like, okay, he's more upfront about it somehow. You felt like that too, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think I didn't question it, right? He gives a little bit of background, and I think it's also a little bit to explain his relationship with his father, which is not particularly good from what I understood in the documentary. And so, yeah, it gives a little bit of that backdrop, but also very much Austria as a whole at the time, because his father was just one of many of these soldiers coming back, defeated, I don't know to what extent he really believed in the cause, but he was at least a part of it. And then, the psychological damage that does, and kind of having to cope with admitting that maybe you were on the wrong side, all of that, I think, feeds very much into at least how Arnold saw his father or sees his father.
Right. And this isn't a direct admission either, but skipping way to the end of the documentary and the end of his life, that's covered in it, Arnold touches on the appeals that he made to Russian fans of him during the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, the one that's still going on right now at the time of this, recording. He made videos about how depressed his parents in Austria, others in Austria were after they were on the losing side of such a bad war. And in these videos, he's kind of trying to convince Russian soldiers to consider that, to question the information they're getting. And they were kind of powerful. They were surprising. I didn't see these when they were going around. Carmen, you said that you did see them.
Yeah, I remember these videos when he put them out, like on, I don't know, YouTube or Instagram or wherever. I don't know. I saw it somewhere, at the time. Maybe it went around here more because he did link it, like you said, back to Austria and back to what he saw in the post-war period when he was young. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I thought it was very well done. It's very convincing. And he really does try to link the current situation and the current climate back to what he saw in his childhood. And I think he makes a very compelling argument.
Yeah. And, it still feels like an oblique kind of admission, right? Or oblique way to talk about it. But yeah, feels like he confronts the issue more than, a lot of other people, I guess, or at least that I'm used to seeing.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't have to say anything.
Right.
And he did choose to address it. And I think he addressed it in like a very kind of constructive way.
So next one, he was possibly an illegal immigrant in the United States at one time. I'm not recalling where I even saw this prompt. Was this maybe like a critique of him or something politics related? I don't know what. I don't think it was in the documentary at all, right?
No, it wasn't in the documentary. And it's not something that I really had known or ever came across.
Okay.
But I think every politician that is foreign born gets this kind of accusation at some point or another.
Right. So I looked into this. All I could find was that he probably did paid work during his visa periods, that like the kind of work that was not allowed under those visas. I saw in the 70s, before he got permanent residency, he was a bricklayer, like getting paid for that, while he had a visa that officially only allowed bodybuilding, which I would love to see the bodybuilding visa.
Right.
Right?
What visa category is that exactly?
Right. So I guess legally that technically made him an illegal immigrant. He could be deported for that. So I guess the answer was like technically yes. He was probably that.
But like, isn't that everybody? I mean, come on.
I know one or two people have done that on a couple countries, like technically, they're overstaying something and
doing apparently bricklaying is not bodybuilding, although I feel like they're not that far apart, but okay.
Actually, yes. The bricklaying would count as a workout. It had to. I mean, you're tanning. So yes, it seems like it's like an extracurricular.
You're sweaty. I mean, it's basically bodybuilding. I don't see the difference.
The next one, he posed for something called After Dark magazine. That was kind of a naughty, like Playboy-esque magazine that happened to have mostly gay readership in like the 70s, and it sounded like it went through the 80s and 90s, but we were asking, hey, where did this immigrant thing come from? Like, where did this idea or this accusation? Well, I can own this one. Maybe I saw it in Wikipedia, but I remembered seeing pictures like this, like from my early like look around the internet days and seeing some Arnold pictures like in the shower. I found new ones, okay, when I was looking for this episode, but that is where this comes from. I'll own this. All right?
There's a history to this.
Yeah. So After Dark was a, quote, arts magazine. It seemed to do that part very seriously, actually. But it also had pictures of naked men with fur coats, kind of strategically draped over private parts. And it really went very hard at both, though. Like Barbra Streisand was on the cover, Lucille Ball, like all of these big stars. And I could see, why a young Arnold who, like, as described in this documentary, he was just kind of saying yes to everything, trying to get his name out there, trying to break into acting. I could totally see why you'd want to be involved.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Barbra Streisand, I mean, that's serious business.
Yeah, but, like the other guys featured in the magazine, he was naked with like a tiny towel. And then the pic that I found did not even have the towel strategically placed. So, if you just search Arnold After Dark, some combination of those, you can see everything if you so choose. Okay, we are not recommending this. We're just leaving this there. Offered without comment. Maybe we'll link to it. I don't know.
I mean,
see what's allowed.
I checked it out, and yeah, that towel is not covering what you would think it would cover.
Yeah. So that's the end of mine. I think you have something a little bit higher brow now, Carmen.
Well, is it higher brow? I'm not sure. It's definitely his biggest scandal that he's had here in Austria. So we are kind of jumping forward in time now. I mentioned this already at the very beginning, that he did have a moment of kind of very low public opinion. And so his lowest point in Austrian public opinion has to do with a stadium that was built near his hometown, which had his name on it, right? So it was called the Arnold Schwarzenegger Stadium. And that was completely uncontroversial until the 2000s, when there was this case of Tukey Williams. Are you familiar with that name? I think people kind of know it.
No.
No? Okay.
I don't know.
So Tukey Williams, his actual name I think is Stanley Williams. He was a co-founder of the Crips, which is a gang in LA, and so he was on death row in California for the murder of 4 people.
Okay.
And he had been convicted and sentenced to death in 1981, and then he was on death row for 20 years. So, I mean, that was kind of the backdrop. He's been on death row for all this time, and then there was a huge movement to try to get clemency for him, because people thought that during his time in prison, he had kind of reformed himself. He had become this kind of big anti-gang activist during prison, and had apparently done quite good work. I mean, I don't know, I never looked into this, but there was at least a big movement of people in California and kind of around the world saying that although he was known for extreme brutality and violence when he was in this gang, and that he had helped form the gang, by 2005, when there were all these appeals going to the court, people were arguing that he had really reformed himself. Interestingly, I mean, it's not super related, but Williams was into bodybuilding as a teen. Oh. So there's some little connection there to Arnold.
Okay.
But what does it actually have to do with Arnold? Well, it has to do with him because there were all these appeals for Williams to get his sentence commuted so that he would not be put to death. All of the courts denied these appeals, and then there was this campaign to go to Schwarzenegger as the governor to grant clemency for, you know, this idea that he had reformed himself. And so you had a lot of anti-death penalty activists who were pleading for this case. The case gained a lot of attention worldwide.
Okay.
And then ultimately Schwarzenegger denied clemency, and Williams was executed on December 13th, 2005, right?
Okay.
That's the basic story. And you might be asking yourself, what the hell does any of this have to do with Austria?
Yeah.
The answer is not much, except that Austria is a very anti-death penalty country. So people here very, very strongly, I mean, there is no death penalty in Austria, and people very strongly oppose the death penalty. And because Schwarzenegger is Austrian, people somehow, I guess, felt that as an Austrian, he should not allowing this person to be executed. And so you had this massive outrage in Austria, major disappointment that an Austrian would not grant clemency.
Yeah.
And then it didn't really stop there, because based on all this public pressure, this great outrage, you had the government in Graz, which is like the big city near where Schwarzenegger is from. They started talking about changing the name of the stadium that had his name on it to disassociate themselves or distance themselves from Arnold. And then some politicians even went further and called for his Austrian citizenship to be revoked, all over this, you know, refusal to grant clemency to some guy in California. You know, I mean, it's very far removed, but anyway.
Wow. Yeah.
And so the stadium itself had actually been named after him as a present for his 50th birthday. And Arnold didn't even want the stadium named after him. He, at the time, said that was something you normally do for people after they have died. And he felt weird about having a stadium named after him while still alive. So you've got the stadium.
This is a mess. This sounds like a mess.
No,
okay, you're not even done, but I think we can already call this.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a mess. There's a stadium that he doesn't want named after him, but they named it after him anyway, because his supporters and the local media were like super into it, and it created publicity and whatever. And so, they ended up naming the stadium after him. And then you have this whole death row case in the US. You have Austrians outraged about it, and then you have Graz saying, okay, maybe we need to rename our stadium to not be associated with this Austrian who, you know, apparently accepts the death penalty. But Arnold was not having it, because instead of waiting for the local politicians to make a decision about the name of the stadium, he one-upped them and basically called their bluff and revoked their right to use his name. And so he basically set an ultimatum and said that his name had to be removed from the stadium by the end of the year, which gave the city 2 weeks' time to remove his name. And so in the end, the decision was made by him to just take his name off the stadium.
Okay.
And so his name was ultimately removed on December 26th. In the middle of the night. They did it kind of under the cover of dark so as not to have too many media and journalists around. And then it was renamed to the UPC Arena, and then it had another name change in 2016. But that is the story of his stadium, which is no longer named after him.
Gosh.
And I think, long story short, don't fuck with Arnie or mind your own business. I don't know.
Yeah, this is giving me like, no, I'm not dumping, you're not dumping me, I'm dumping you, like...
Yeah, totally.
Okay, which is sort of odd for like a governor, but... And I mean, I don't know, I'm also kind of getting some like, Austria has kind of a troubled relationship with their stadiums and arenas maybe, okay? We just talked about the Schneepalast, and one day it's there, one day it's just gone, and it's all sold for scrap. You know what I mean? It's like, maybe, you'd think in like 100 years, they'd be doing this better. Okay, their arena setups, but happiest like place on earth except for this. Okay, so this needs improvement.
But it kind of does show, it's this weird thing of like, somehow Austrians feel some kind of ownership over him and some kind of sense of like, he has to like act in California in a way that accords with like Austrian attitudes toward things, even though the situation and the law there is different.
Totally. I mean, yeah, it just like totally happens. It's totally unreasonable and also totally natural. Okay. I feel like all of these like everyone is wrong and right. Like,
and I just love that it turned into this petty fight over like the use of his name. Yeah.
For some arena. Okay.
So I would say that was his lowest point in terms of how people perceived him in Austria, because it was big in the media. I remember seeing this story back then. I mean, I didn't even live in Austria at the time, but I remember kind of, I think through my parents or somehow I knew about the story. So it was big news.
Okay. Yeah, I did not know that at all. Okay, so now I was going to say like, now some hot takes, now even hotter takes, because that was an interesting little spat story. Carmen, does Arnold seem Austrian to you? Like, if so, if not, like what feels Austrian about him or his life? Because, I think for a lot of people, I would say like a lot of Americans, Austrianness, it's a little bit hard to put your finger on, right? Like I think it just gets kind of swept up into like
don't say it.
Germanness, no offense. I know. I knew I was walking into it, but I'm just kind of like, but somehow, like you said too, somehow he does not. Like, I don't think anyone thinks Arnold Schwarzenegger is German.
Because he just isn't. He's like so Austrian, which is one of the things that's quite nice about him. Yeah.
Okay, so there's the answer, I guess. So like what feels Austrian about him, his life, etc.
So one thing that he mentions a couple times in the documentary that is a very Austrian thing is this concept of Schmäh.
Okay.
He translates it, I think, as kind of like bullshitting, right? Do you remember this in the documentary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He says it at the beginning, and then he says it, like, all throughout the last episode or something, I feel like.
Yeah, I really love that he just uses the German word Schmäh.
Okay.
And he just repeats it multiple times, even though he's speaking English. So yeah, Schmäh. Schmäh is very, very Austrian. It's very not German. Because Schmäh is all about sort of, like, charming bullshitting in a way, right? It's kind of being funny about things, and kind of getting your way, or kind of, making light of situations, but in a sort of very charming, lighthearted way.
Oh, interesting. So is it kind of like bullshit plus like sexing it up? Or plus like, is it maybe like that? Or like charming your way through it? Or
it's kind of charming your way through things, yeah. It's like a sort of...
Okay.
Yeah, fake it till you make it, but like with charm. I don't know, like in a very charming way.
Okay, that sounds... I kind of like that more now.
It's very hard to explain.
Because I was just kind of taking it bullshit, which is kind of like, okay, well, are you just like lying? You know what I mean? Like it could be maybe taken more negative, like from the English definition. Okay.
Yeah, bullshit is a little too hard for me and sounds a little too negative. Schmäh has kind of a positive connotation of like, I am kind of bullshitting you, but like, you like it.
Okay.
But like you kind of know that I'm bullshitting you, and you totally accept it. It's hard to explain.
Okay.
It's one of those things, you don't hear it very often anymore, but like Wiener Schmäh, so Viennese Schmäh is also a like particular brand of this. And classically, or like traditionally in coffee shops in Vienna, the waiters would have like Viennese Schmäh, which means they would kind of fuck with you a little bit. They kind of joke with you. You know, if you ordered like, I don't know, for example, if you order like
a smoothie.
Oh yeah, you want to tell that story?
Okay, that is a personal callback story to mutual acquaintance of ours trying to order smoothies like all over Europe, and Carmen being like, they don't know what that is. Okay, Annie, that's for the Patreon that doesn't exist.
There are no smoothies in Europe. I think that's what I insisted, which was not true. But anyway,
yeah.
No, but it'll be things like, I don't know. Like, I remember once, one that comes to mind. I mean, it's a very, like, simple example, but I think I ordered, like, a small soda or whatever, something to drink, and they brought me a big one, and I was like, oh, but I ordered small, and the guy was like, well, it's not filled all the way. Like, consider it small. And I was like, okay, like, that's the answer, you know?
Well...
So yeah, and I think Arnold really does the Schmäh thing quite a lot as well. I assume it served him well in politics, because it is all about...
Results seem to speak for themselves. Well, at least for like life overall. Wow.
I'd say he's also pretty practical about things. He seems to kind of not get too bogged down in sort of unnecessary things. I think, I don't know, he comes off in the documentary as pretty practical and sort of has an idea of what he wants to do, and then he just gets on with it, which I don't know if that's super Austrian, but maybe to some extent. And then I think, he's this really interesting mix of sort of Austrian with the Schmäh and the charm and the kind of joking, charming demeanor, but then he also has this real like this real American like bigness to him. So he's kind of the perfect combination. He himself is big, and the whole bodybuilding thing was all about making himself big, and America is all about everything being big and over the top and, kind of larger than it needs to be. And he kind of embodies that, like actually literally embodies it. So I think that's quite an interesting combination. So he has a bit the Austrian personality, but then the American bigness that was also always there.
Yeah, actually. Right. Like, in some ways, he's more American than, like, a lot of Americans, right? I remember the scene where isn't this in the documentary, where he's just driving around in a tank he owns? I'm just like, huh?
Yes.
Like, what kind of... Yeah. That, is from a different era, I feel like, of, Americanness. And it was, like, a top or bottom 1%, depending on your perspective, like, kind of Americanness that that he was displaying there. But very American. Felt very American.
I mean, he also popularized the Hummer as a, like, commercial vehicle, right?
I wouldn't doubt that. I don't know that story, but I don't doubt it.
I'm pretty sure he did. He was, like, one of the first people to ever have a Hummer, or maybe the first person.
I was just thinking, Carmen, not to toot our horn here, but you are uniquely qualified as someone who spent lots of time in Austria and the U.S. to comment on someone who spent significant time in Austria and the U.S., okay? Like him. So, he might hear this, okay? And he's just going to have to take the answer. Okay? You are an expert in that experience.
I mean, I mean, I've lived at least some of that. But I don't know, I kind of was thinking, on some level, the American kind of bigness could be really off-putting. Like, driving in a tank, I mean, is obnoxious. He's constantly smoking a cigar, which is also kind of obnoxious. He's got this huge house. A lot of it really, and, the Hummers and all of that, it really could be somehow obnoxious, but he kind of pulls it off somehow. And he has enough charm and enough sort of...
Schmäh?
I don't know. There's enough schmäh somehow that you just kind of, give him a pass.
Yeah.
At least that's how I felt about it.
No, I did too. I think, for me, it was this proper mix of, like, just talking about, his ambition. Also, there was enough humility in there. I felt like he talked about, the community that helped him do it, like, the entire time. Pretty much this entire, way through the journey. There was no part of it where I felt like he was saying, gosh, I was just so great at this, and that's why. Not really, He was like, hey, I was driven, then all these lucky things happened, and then I just said yes. Gosh, and I don't know if that narrative is more American or Austrian. It feels like more unusually humble, maybe, for somebody who's in that position.
Yeah, he's not bombastic or, self-promoting even, really. I found it really introspective in the sense of, like you said, he gives a lot of credit to his mentors, to people who helped him. He very explicitly says that he's not a self-made man and that he had a lot of help along the way and he had a lot of luck and, there were a lot of things that he couldn't really control, but he was also very driven. Yeah. So, of course there was an element that came from him, but he's humble. He comes off as introspected and humble despite having one of the biggest careers in like three different industries, which I would say almost nobody has ever achieved.
No one I can think of.
Yeah, I don't know who would be in that league. And so maybe that's part of why you just accept sort of the obnoxious stuff, or you kind of give him a pass, because he does, he's not super arrogant about it. He's sort of, he's introspective. And so he comes off, that's why I think I came out of it with more respect for him than I had going in. It's not like I disrespected him going in, but I just had kind of not much of an opinion about him.
Yeah.
And watching the docuseries, I kind of thought he comes off really quite well. And I came out thinking, seems like a decent guy.
Yeah. No, overall, I recommend it. And I'd seen it in my feed or whatever, but I don't know that I would have watched it actually if you hadn't said, hey, check this out. So recommending it.
Yeah, I recommend it too. And one thing that stood out to me as well, which is in the last episode, the filmmaker or, the person interviewing him asks if he has any advice for people. And the advice that he gives, which I thought was quite nice advice, was he says, stay busy and be useful. And I think that's actually really quite good advice.
Yeah.
Be useful, help other people, be a part of your community, and stay busy, do stuff. And I think that's decent advice.
Mm-hmm. Now more than ever.
Okay. Now more than ever, yes. Yes, yeah. All right, so, that's our... Oh, one thing that we didn't mention that I do still want to shoehorn in here at the end is Austrians, I think mostly lovingly, although somewhat a little bit derisively sometimes, we tend to call him Arnie. So if you say Arnie, everybody knows who you're talking about, and it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. So good old Arnie.
Huh. So wait, is Arnie a standard nickname for that name?
I literally don't know anybody else with the name Arnold. It's not a common name.
Okay. All right.
So, no.
Okay. And his last name too, right? Isn't that very rare there?
Very unusual, yeah. It's actually pronounced...
Okay.
Correctly it would be pronounced Schwarzenegger. And it's not common at all. I've never heard that name anywhere else.
Okay, wow. First and last name. All right, he was going to be at least strange or a star.
He was going to stand out, yeah. So that's Arnie for you.
Name drop Arnie, next time you're in Vienna, okay? See who turns around.
Yes. See who shows up. Yeah, exactly. All right, so that's it for our show. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, share with your friends or leave us a 5-star review. And if you didn't like it then, well, don't worry about that review.
You can find us on social medias, Vienna Past and Prez on Instagram, or send us your episode ideas at viennapastandpresent@gmail.com.
Auf Wiedersehen, pfiat euch, Baba.
Bye.